When you think of cowboys earning their keep in the Old West, what's the first image that comes to mind? Dusty trails, bellowing cattle, and months-long drives to distant railheads? Well, partner, that iconic image tells just one chapter of a much bigger story. The cowboy's wallet was filled through far more creative means than Hollywood would have you believe. From gambling saloons to homestead claims, the American cowboy was nothing if not resourceful. Now let's talk about what everyone thinks they know, the cattle drive. It's 1871, and the first golden rays of dawn break over the Texas prairie. 25-year-old cowboy Elijah Banks rubs sleep from his eyes as he watches thousands of longhorn cattle stir in the morning light. He's 2 weeks into the grueling 3-month journey from South Texas to the railhead in Abilene, Kansas, where cattle buyers will pay top dollar for these hardy Texas beasts. The trail boss shouts over the morning campfire, "$30 a month, boys. That's what keeps your saddles on these broncs and your stomachs full of beans." $30 monthly, about $900 in today's money, was the standard wage for cowboys during the golden age of cattle drives from 1866 to 1886. Not a fortune, but for young men with few prospects after the Civil War, it represented opportunity. What many don't realize is just how intense and temporary this work really was. These weren't year-round jobs. A cowboy might spend just 3 to 4 months on drives, leaving them scrambling for income the rest of the year. The famous Western Trail from San Antonio to Dodge City could take 35 days in good weather, closer to 60 in bad. That meant even with multiple drives, a cowboy still needed other work to survive. The money wasn't handed over easily either. For every sunrise, these men faced a dozen ways to die. Stampedes could be triggered by something as simple as a lightning strike, or a cowboy lighting a match at the wrong moment. When thousands of half-wild longhorns bolted in terror, trampling was a real threat. River crossings claimed countless lives, both bovine and human. The Red River and the Brazos were particularly treacherous, with quicksand banks and sudden currents. Take the story of Juan Martinez, a Mexican vaquero who worked the Chisholm Trail in 1869. During a crossing of the flooded Red River, he lost his mount to the current. Rather than abandoning the drive, he borrowed another horse and continued north, his monthly pay docked for the lost animal. By the time he reached Abilene, he'd made just $18 for 6 weeks of brutal work. Weather played its own cruel games. Freezing spring rains could soak a cowboy to the bone for days. Summer heat on the open plains baked men in their saddles. And on night watch, typically 2 hours on, 4 off around the clock, a cowboy might face both extremes in the same 24 hours. Diet was monotonous at best: beans, coffee, biscuits, and occasionally beef from cattle that couldn't make the journey. The chuck wagon cook was often the oldest, most respected man on the drive, not just because he fed everyone, but because he typically doubled as the outfit's doctor, dentist, and banker. By the time the railhead came into view, these men had earned every penny of their pay. The moment was bittersweet. Payday meant celebration in the cowtown saloons and brothels, but it also meant many cowboys would blow 3 months' wages in 3 raucous days. The cattle baron who owned the herd, meanwhile, could clear $20 to $25 per head. On a drive of 2,500 cattle, assuming losses of 200 to 300 animals along the way, that meant profits of $50,000 or more. No wonder many cowboys eventually hoped to own their own spread. What finally ended this iconic profession wasn't outlaws or Native American raids, but something far more mundane: barbed wire. As open range gave way to fenced parcels in the 1880s, and as railroads pushed deeper into cattle country, the need for long drives diminished. The last major drives along the Western Trail occurred around 1886, leaving cowboys to find new ways to employ their hard-earned skills. So while cattle drives do deserve their place in Western lore, they represent just one chapter in the cowboy's economic story, glamorized by distance and time into something far more romantic than the grueling, temporary, dangerous work they actually were. When the dust of the cattle drive settled, most cowboys didn't hang up their spurs for the year. They simply shifted gears. Year-round ranch work, less glamorous but far more common, became their bread and butter. Imagine a crisp October morning in 1873 on the sprawling King Ranch in South Texas. While cattle drives had ended for the season, Frank Spellman, a seasoned cowboy with a reputation for breaking even the wildest Mustangs, rises before dawn. His calloused hands reach for worn gloves as he prepares for another 16-hour workday that pays about $1 per day plus room and board. "Ranch work ain't pretty, but it's steady," Frank might have said, echoing the sentiment of thousands of cowboys who found permanent employment on establishments like the Exit Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, a behemoth operation spanning over 3 million acres and requiring more than 150 full-time cowboys to manage its 250,000 cattle. These weren't short-term gigs. They were careers that demanded year-round commitment through blistering summers and bone-chilling winters. The work itself was relentless and varied. Spring meant the back-breaking labor of roundups and branding, where cowboys might work from 4 a.m. until well after dusk for weeks straight. On the Diamond Bar Ranch in Arizona Territory, cowboys branded upwards of 400 calves daily during peak season, each animal requiring multiple men to rope, wrestle, and mark with the ranch's symbol. Summer brought fence mending, a particularly despised task as cowboys navigated prickly pear and mesquite to repair miles of boundary lines. One Wyoming cowhand's journal from 1882 complained, "Spent another damnable day stringing wire. My hands bleed through my gloves. This ain't what I signed on for, but it pays the same as riding." The threat of rustlers made security work essential. Cowboys often doubled as armed guards, patrolling remote sections of ranch property where thieves might attempt to skim cattle. This was dangerous work. Rustling was often punishable by hanging, making confrontations potentially deadly. Tom Horn, before his notorious career as a hired gun, worked as a simple ranch hand for the Swanland and Cattle Company in Wyoming, where his tracking skills proved invaluable in protecting the herd from both human and animal predators. Winter brought its own brutal challenges. Cowboys broke ice on water holes, hauled feed to snowbound cattle, and rescued animals trapped in ravines or snowdrifts. During the devastating winter of 1886 to 87, when temperatures plunged to 40 below zero across Montana Territory, cowboys from the DHS Ranch worked around the clock, often sleeping just 2 or 3 hours nightly, in desperate attempts to save cattle. Despite their heroic efforts, some outfits lost up to 90% of their herds. Beyond traditional ranch work, some cowboys leveraged their riding and shooting skills in specialized roles. The Overland Mail Company hired former cowboys to guard stagecoaches, paying premium wages of $100 to $150 monthly for men willing to risk confrontations with bandits. Mining operations in places like Nevada's Comstock Lode employed cowboys to protect payroll deliveries. These positions were coveted for their relatively high pay, though they came with obvious dangers. Wyatt Earp's lesser-known early career perfectly illustrates this path. Before becoming a lawman, Earp worked as a teamster and security guard for freight wagons traveling between railheads and frontier settlements. In 1868, he earned $50 monthly, protecting Union Pacific payrolls, nearly double the wage of an average cowboy. His riding skills and steady demeanor, honed during earlier cowboying work, made him particularly suited for this dangerous but lucrative position. Even on established ranches, skill specialization could increase a cowboy's value and wages. Horse wranglers who cared for and trained the ranch's remuda of 50, 100 horses might earn $5, 10 more monthly than regular hands. Blacksmiths and men skilled with veterinary treatments commanded similar premiums. One particularly valued specialty was the rep rider, experienced cowboys who represented their ranch's interests during multi-outfit roundups, ensuring no cattle bearing their brand were missed or misappropriated. Whether mending fences under the scorching sun, standing lonely night guard during blizzards, or protecting valuable assets with nothing but a revolver and their wits, these year-round positions form the true economic backbone of cowboy life. Far from the romantic 3-month adventures so often celebrated in dime novels and silver screen epics. Now here's where cowboys got truly creative with their futures. Imagine this. You've spent years in the saddle, eating dust, dodging stampedes, sleeping on hard ground. Your body aches, You've got nothing to show for it but calluses and maybe a few dollars saved. Then, one day, you hear about the Homestead Act of 1862. For just $18 in filing fees, less than a cowboy made in a week, you could claim 160 acres of land, your own spread. All you had to do was live on it for 5 years and make improvements. For men who'd been working other people's cattle on other people's land, this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a revolution. Take the story of James Broken Hand Turner. In 1874, after 8 grueling years working cattle drives out of Texas, Turner filed a claim on a promising plot in western Nebraska. The locals laughed when they saw him, a 30-year-old cowboy with a permanently mangled right hand from a roping accident, attempting to become a farmer rancher. "What's a busted cowpoke going to do with prime bottomland?" they asked. 5 years later, Turner's homestead boasted 40 head of cattle, a sturdy 2-room cabin, and the beginnings of what would become one of the region's most productive apple orchards. The beauty of homesteading for cowboys was that they already possessed the most critical knowledge. They understood cattle, horses, water sources, and the brutal realities of frontier life. What they lacked in farming experience, they made up for in practical survival skills. When Teddy Blue Abbott staked his claim along Montana's Musselshell River in the 1880s, he already knew which grasses would fatten cattle fastest and where to dig his well for the sweetest water. He'd learned these things the hard way, riding for other men's brands. The transition wasn't always smooth. Cowboys turned homesteaders faced back-breaking work, building cabins, digging wells, and plowing fields, tasks many had never tackled before. Many claims failed. The harsh winter of 1885 to 86 wiped out numerous new ranches across the Dakota Territory. Jack Flagg, a former Texas cowboy who'd established a promising homestead near present-day Sundance, Wyoming, lost everything in that blizzard. Yet rather than return to wage work, Flagg filed a new claim further south and started again. By 1900, his second attempt had grown into a prosperous 640-acre ranch combining his original homestead with adjacent claims purchased from discouraged neighbors. Women played crucial roles in these success stories. Many cowboys specifically courted and married school teachers, widows, or women with farming backgrounds who brought complementary skills to the homesteading partnership. When former trail driver William Cody, no relation to Buffalo Bill, married Sarah Edwards, a widowed Kansas farm woman, in 1877, their combined knowledge transformed a modest Nebraska homestead claim into a thriving mixed operation. Sarah's vegetable garden and chicken coop provided immediate sustenance and income, while William's cattle herd grew slowly but steadily. The Homestead Act wasn't the only land opportunity cowboys seized. The Timber Culture Act of 1873 offered additional acreage to settlers who planted trees. The Desert Land Act of 1877 provided 640 acres in arid regions if the claimant irrigated a portion. Savvy cowboys often combined these programs, accumulating substantial holdings. Former cowhand Daniel Harrison used all 3 acts to piece together a 200-acre ranch in eastern Colorado by 1890. Starting with nothing but his saddle and the knowledge gained from a decade of cowboying, Harrison died a wealthy landowner whose children attended college, an unimaginable trajectory for most cowboys. Not all claims succeeded through conventional means. Along the contested ranges of Wyoming and Montana, where cattle barons fought to maintain control, cowboys sometimes filed strategic claims around water sources, then sold these key properties to their employers for handsome profits or ranch partnerships. Former cowboy-turned-homesteader Tom Davis parlayed his 160-acre claim, controlling 3 miles of creek frontage, into a partial ownership stake in the very ranch that had previously employed him. Perhaps most remarkable about this transformation from wage worker to landowner was the speed with which it could occur. A cowboy who filed a claim in 1870 might be running his own modest herd by 1875. The same man driving someone else's cattle up the Western Trail could, within half a decade, be building wealth for himself and future generations. This path from employee to owner represented the quintessential American opportunity, one that turned countless saddle tramps into respected ranchers, transforming not just their economic status, but the very social fabric of the developing West. When cattle season ended and the winter winds howled across the plains, many cowboys traded their lariats for decks of cards and their saddles for bar stools. The saloons of frontier towns like Deadwood, Tombstone, and Dodge City became winter quarters for cowboys with itchy fingers and money to burn, or multiply. Picture this. It's December 1878 in Fort Griffin, Texas. The cattle are sold, the drives are done, and cowboy Jesse Thornton sits at a scarred wooden table, hat pulled low, studying his cards and the faces of the men around him. 6 months of hard-earned wages ride on the turn of a card. Pharaoh paid my way through 3 winters when cattle prices crashed, wrote former cowboy Emmett Kelly in his rarely cited 1913 memoir. I'd rather face a stampede than some of those card sharps, but a man's got to eat. Kelly was far from alone. In the seasonal cycle of cowboy life, gambling wasn't just recreation. It was an alternative economy where skilled players could double their annual income during the off-season. The truly talented might earn more at the tables than they ever did in the saddle. Saloons themselves offered employment opportunities. Cowboys with a knack for handling troublemakers often found work as bouncers or security. At the iconic Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City, former trail driver Mike Callahan earned $2 a day, plus free lodging for maintaining order, comparable to cowboy wages, but with a roof overhead and no chance of being trampled by longhorns. His familiarity with the temperaments and habits of trail hands made him particularly effective at diffusing tensions before they erupted into costly gunplay. Behind the bar, cowboys with good memories and quick hands could earn even more. Bartending at the Oriental Saloon in Tombstone paid up to $5 daily, far exceeding cowhand wages. The legendary Wyatt Earp himself took a financial interest in the Oriental's gambling operations after his cowboying and lawman days, understanding that faro and poker separated cowboys from their money far more efficiently than hard work ever could. For the musically inclined, entertainment provided another avenue. Though rarely mentioned in Western mythology, many outfits had at least one cowboy who could play fiddle, guitar, or harmonica. These skills, honed around campfires during cattle drives, translated into paying gigs in frontier saloons. Sam Hawkins, who rode for the famous J.A. Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, spent his winters playing fiddle at Buffalo Bill's Hotel in North Platte, Nebraska. His earnings there surpassed his cowboy wages while demanding considerably less physical risk. Gambling itself was a complex economy with its own hierarchy. At the bottom were the crooked Monte dealers working mining camps and trail towns, separating greenhorns from their wages through sleight of hand and stacked decks. Above them were the legitimate gamblers who relied on skill, probability, and reading human nature rather than cheating. At the pinnacle were professionals like Bat Masterson, who parlayed his knowledge of human psychology from his buffalo hunting and lawman days into a successful gambling career. The games themselves varied widely. While poker remains fixed in the popular imagination, faro actually reigned supreme in Western saloons. Bucking the tiger, playing against the faro dealer or tiger, was considered the quickest route to doubling your stake or losing everything. 3-card Monte, Chuck-a-Luck, and Keno also separated cowboys from their earnings, though most featured worse odds than faro or poker. For cowboys with mathematical minds, these games offered steady income through careful play and thorough understanding of the odds. The geography of gambling followed the cattle trails. As railheads moved westward, gambling establishments sprouted in their wake. Abilene gave way to Ellsworth, then to Dodge City as the primary cattle shipping points from Texas. Each spawned legendary saloons where cowboys might win or lose half a year's wages in a single night. Even remote cow towns like Laramie Wyoming or Miles City, Montana, supported thriving gambling economies during winter months when ranch work slowed. Not all cowboys who entered this world emerged intact. Some, like legendary trail boss Dave Sponsilier, lost years of savings in single disastrous sessions. Others developed reputations as card sharps themselves, men whom other gamblers avoided. A select few, like Ben Thompson, became so proficient they abandoned cowboying entirely for the more lucrative profession of gambling. Thompson himself opened the famous Iron Front Saloon in Austin after years working cattle, exemplifying the pattern of cowboys graduating from wage workers to business owners through the portal of gambling expertise. For every success story, however, a dozen cowboys rode back to spring roundup, broke but wiser, having learned the hard way that while cattle might stomp you, at least they couldn't bluff. As one anonymous cowhand scrawled in the Drover's Cottage Register in Dodge City, "Came with $60 and a good saddle, leaving with saddle only. Will return next season to recover losses or die trying." When the cattle trails grew quiet and ranch work grew scarce, some cowboys turned their tracking skills and steady gun hands toward a more dangerous but lucrative occupation, bringing in wanted men. The thin line between outlaw and lawman in the Old West wasn't just a saying. It was an economic reality that many cowboys straddled throughout their careers. Picture a snow-dusted morning in 1880 Wyoming Territory. Former cowboy Levi Carson adjusts his deputy marshal's badge, studies a wanted poster, and heads out on a trail gone cold to most eyes, but not to a man who'd tracked stray cattle across hundreds of miles of unmarked prairie. The same eyes that can spot a particular steer's tracks among thousands can find a man trying not to be found, explained Marcus Harding, who alternated between cowboying in Texas and tracking fugitives in Indian Territory during the 1870s. His bounty hunting brought in up to $200 per capture, equivalent to nearly 6 months of cowboy wages. The mathematics were simple, but the work was anything but. Tracking desperate men across unforgiving terrain meant risking ambush with every ridge crossed and canyon entered. Few embodied this transition better than legendary Lawman Bass Reeves. Though his legacy now rests primarily on his extraordinary career as one of the first black deputy U.S. Marshals in Indian Territory, Reeves began as a cowhand in Texas. The tracking and survival skills he developed working cattle served him well when he pinned on a badge. During his 32-year career as a deputy marshal, Reeves brought in over 3,000 criminals, earning substantial capture fees on top of his marshal's salary. By the time he retired, this former cowboy had amassed enough wealth to purchase significant property, a path from wage worker to property owner that many cowboys envied. The mathematics of bounty hunting were compelling. In the 1870s and 1880s, rewards ranged from $50 for common horse thieves to $500 or more for murderers and gang leaders. A skilled hunter bringing in 2 fugitives per month could earn more than the foreman of a major ranch. These rewards were particularly attractive in the aftermath of economic downturns like the Panic of 1873. When ranch work became scarce and wages fell. Former cowboys, with their combination of riding endurance, tracking ability, and weapons proficiency, became natural recruits for frontier law enforcement. Not all followed the legitimate path. Some cowboys turned their skills toward outright banditry, while others walked a murky middle ground as mercenaries or hired guns. The notorious Tom Horn began his career as a legitimate cowboy, shifted to scouting and bounty hunting, and eventually became a hired assassin for cattle barons targeting suspected rustlers. His story illustrates how easily these skills could be turned toward darker purposes when legal work dried up. For many, the badge offered a more stable version of the cowboy life. Town marshals in frontier communities like Dodge City or Tombstone earned between $100 to $150 monthly, with far more regular hours than ranch work provided. Former cowboys were particularly valued as lawmen precisely because they understood the rhythms and tensions of cattle towns. When Wyatt Earp served as deputy marshal in Cowtown, Dodge City, his familiarity with the temperament of trail hands fresh off a cattle drive proved invaluable in maintaining order without unnecessary bloodshed. The intersection of cowboying and law enforcement extended beyond individuals to entire communities. The famous vigilante movement in 1860s Montana Territory was largely organized by ranch owners and cowboys tired of rampant horse theft and cattle rustling. When formal law arrived in these regions, many of the same men transitioned from vigilantes to deputies and sheriffs. This pattern repeated across the frontier. The skills that made good cowboys often made effective peace officers. Court testimony itself became a source of income. Cowboys who witnessed crimes could earn witness fees of $1 to $3 daily, plus travel expenses when cases came to trial. Significant supplemental income during winter months when ranch work slowed. Some cowboys developed reputations as reliable witnesses and were repeatedly called upon by territorial prosecutors, creating an informal network of cowboy informants who reported law violations while going about their regular duties. For all the romance later attached to both cowboys and lawmen, the economic reality was straightforward. When Joshua Williams hung up his lariat and picked up a deputy's badge in Colorado's San Luis Valley, he wasn't changing his fundamental identity. He was simply finding better-paying year-round application for the same skills. As he reportedly told a friend in 1882, "Chasing men pays better than chasing cows, though both can kill you if you ain't careful." It was a pragmatic calculation made by hundreds of cowboys throughout the Old West, creating a fluid continuum between the iconic figures of cowboy and lawman that Hollywood would later treat as entirely separate archetypes.